Hey, so today is a solo episode. If you're listening to the podcast, I just said that in the intro. I'm going to forego a personal update like I usually do. In the podcast, I don't usually do them on the YouTubes. Oh man, I'm tired and old. These are bad combinations online. I don't usually do them on the YouTube. On this bit, that's still wrong. I don't usually do them on the video portion of the podcast, but I am going to do a quick thing just to remind you that we have some deadlines coming up. We have 3 events this summer and fall. The first one is a really exciting master class in which we're going to do 4.5 hours on theme and how it ties together with character growth and personality. If you've read the book Story Hypothesis, JP Rindfleisch and I are doing it together, and it is going to be just a really fantastic class on like how to build themes through organizing your characters. We're also going to take time to look at all the different personality tests that you can use, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, Strengths Finder, a couple more, and we're going to talk about what those personality tests do great with and what they're lacking each one, and like if you're going to use one, kind of where you need to fill to talk about character growth and stuff. So that's coming July 27th. You can do it live on Zoom with us, or you can register for the recording. We also have a a mastermind happening September, October. It's called Edit Yourself Like a Dialogue Doctor. And we are going to be talking about how we as Dialogue Doctor coaches, JP, Laura, and I, how we edit, what we're looking for when we edit, with the idea that we're going to equip you to edit your own work. And it is going to be workshop style. So one week we'll have meeting and teaching, and then we'll have like a homework assignment that you work on, and then we'll come back and have more gathering and teaching. So it's going to be a process of you learning to edit yourself like we edit when we do Dialogue Doctor coaching. So that's another great event you can register for on the website, dialoguedoctor.com. Third thing we have going on is we're going to do our 80-day writing program. Starting in October. It's going to go October, November, and into December. It's 1 month of planning, 1 month of writing, hopefully writing, setting some goals for yourself for writing, whether that's every day or a certain amount a week. It will help you build those goals. And then it's a cohort where we work together to stick to them. Phenomenal program. We've done 2 of them now, and everybody that's gone through them has loved them. And people keep coming back. So that's always a good sign when you do one and then you come back for the next one. So you can register for that on the website too. If you go to dialoguedoctor.com and look at the button in the menu that says summer fall events, there's more information about each event there, and you can register. Now, the deadline that's coming up is we sell a season pass where you can get registration for all 3 events. And if you buy the season pass, you buy all 3 together, you save yourself $110. So if you want to register for all 3 and you're like, man, they all sound interesting, get that season pass. I think we have some left. We limit those to 20. We still have some. So come buy the season pass. We're going to close the season pass July 10th. So you got to register by July 10th. All right. That's enough of the business stuff. That's enough of business Dialogue Doctor things, but they are really exciting. Events. I'm pumped about them. I think they're going to be really informative, and I think people are going to leave changed. Look, can we say that? We can say that. No, we build our events around empowering you with tools that you can use not just at that event, or not just use once, but use like for the rest of your writing career. Right? Like that's our goal when we have these events. So I'd love for you to come and be a part of that. Now, I'm going to do a solo episode. It's called Rethinking Cast. I've been promising this for a while. I've been promising this episode for a while. In fact, this is part 2 of episode 185. So in 185, I did a solo episode on understanding your main character, and we talked about vehicles. We're just going to touch on that today. And today, we're going to think more about your other cast members. Not your main character, your vehicle character, but all of the other characters around them. I'm going to do a quick recap of vehicles if you don't know what they are, but to get a detailed look at vehicle characters and how they work, go to episode 185 and watch it, and then come back and watch this one, because this is the rest of the cast. So let's get going. So what's the goal? Why are we talking about cast? I had somebody actually recently ask me, hey, you're the Dialogue Doctor. Why are you talking about cast building? Um, why aren't you talking about dialogue, Jeff? So you're seeing dialogue as characters interacting. Um your scenes to be driven by that interaction. You want as many scenes as possible driven by characters interacting, because the characters interacting is what builds energy in your work and what draws the reader into the moment. It's what keeps them reading. So knowing that the goal is characters interacting, what we want to do is we want to create a cast of characters that the reader is going to completely fall in love with, obsess over, and tell their friends about, right? Like, I've had this happen to some of my writer friends where um people show up to like book signings or show up to places they know the writer's going to be dressed like the writer's characters. I mean, that's the dream, right? To have like people dress up like our characters. Like, come on, nobody's done it for me, but that is the dream. Come on, living the dream. Of course, I write modern day fiction, so you'd just be wearing like a t-shirt and jeans. Anyway, neither here nor there. That's the dream, is that people fall so deeply in love with your characters and connect so much with your characters that they show up to places dressed like your characters. I mean, come on, that's amazing. So that's what we want to empower you to do, and that's why we're talking about cast. We're talking about cast because your scenes are characters interacting, and we want to nail those cast relationships in a way that just gets your readers super excited. Okay, so the way that happens is the readers fall in love with the character that takes them on the emotional journey, right? So we want to find, then that's our vehicle character, but we want our characters to take readers on an emotional journey. Or sometimes I'll talk about the reader is in a play, the reader's in a theater. It's an empty theater, it's just the reader, and there's an empty stage. And then as they read your book, the story of your book takes place on the stage of their imagination, right? They're imagining your book working through. So as they read your book, they're imagining this drama taking place. We want them attaching to characters and having this emotional journey with characters, because the emotional journey is what the reader's showing up for. So that's a long way of saying we're working on this cast of characters because we want to create characters that take our reader on an emotional journey. So here's the problem. When I try to talk to writers about their characters, we have these tools, these ways to describe characters that are plot focused. The plot and the emotional journey are not the same thing. The plot is the path that the character takes. The character's perspective on that path is the emotional journey. How the character grows and changes while it's on that path, while the character's on that path, is the emotional journey, not necessarily the path itself. Right. So the path is just the means to the end. What the reader's showing up for is that beautiful character growth arc where they see the character struggle, the character realizes their flaws, the character realizes how they have to change. And in a heroic tale, the character is able to change and overcome whatever downfalls they had. In a tragedy, the character fails to change and is not able to overcome the worst version of themselves. So that's the emotional journey the reader's in for, that character change. The plot is a means to that end. It's steps we take to get there. The problem is, going back to the problem is, the terms that we have to talk about our characters are focused on the plot and not on the character growth. So we use words like hero and villain. The hero is the character that is playing toward the victory, whatever the victory in the plot is. The villain is trying to stop victory in the plot, but they're plot focused terms. Same with protagonist and antagonist. Protagonist is driving the plot in the way we want to see it happen. Antagonist is fighting against the victory of the plot. And then we have side characters who are like, oh, well, these characters don't necessarily have a role in the plot, they're just around. Or we have like an ally who's helping the protagonist, or an ally to the antagonist. But again, these are all plot focused. They're all about what's happening in the story, and that's not what the reader is falling in love with. What the reader's falling in love with is the character's emotional journey. So we need some new terms. And I talked about this in 185 too. So if you watch 185, this is a little bit of a recap. We need new terms. So about a year ago, as Laura and JP and I were coaching, we started kind of working on like, well, what would we call characters if we were focused on the character growth arcs in the plot? What would they be? We came up with these 4 terms. Vehicles are characters that you're on the emotional journey with. These are most often your main character or your the character that you're in the POV of, your point of view character is often your vehicle character, because we get the main character or the point of view character's perspective. So that's your vehicle. And that's the one your reader's most likely to be on an emotional journey with, because you do have that character's perspective on what's happening. That is also the character that has to change. And again, I went deep into vehicles on 185. I'm not going to go that deep into them right now. The next 2 terms, engines and anchors, these are characters, and they're an engine or anchor based on how they relate to the vehicle. Engines help the vehicle grow in positive ways. Anchors encourage the vehicle to grow into the worst version of themselves or negative growth. And then hazards are characters that force the vehicle to swerve. Now, today we're going to detail into engines, anchors, and hazards. Let's real quick though just hit some points about vehicles. And again, if you want to go deep into vehicles, go to 185. So episode 185. So the vehicles are characters that your plot revolves around. They're first, in the first person POV, then this is first person point of view writing, then this is your, POV character. If it's a third person point of view writing, then the character we spend the most time with. All vehicles have to have growth arcs. All vehicles have to have growth arcs, except a symbolic vehicle. Again, go to 185 to hear about that. But all vehicles have to have growth arcs. We break down into 5 kind of vehicles. Again, I'm just going to reference these because I do go deep into these in that other episode. But lead vehicles are like what you think of, what you normally think of as your main character or your POV character. Third party vehicles are narrators that kind of tell the story to the reader, also need growth arcs, by the way. Supporting vehicles are POV characters that don't have a main position but may have like 3 or 4 scenes in your book. Chorus vehicles are when we take a whole bunch of people and use them as a single character. I talk about that more in that other episode. And then symbolic vehicles are the only types of vehicles that don't change because they represent a worldview. So 5 types of vehicles. Again, we're just skimming over this today so we can get to the other stuff. The key to understand is that vehicles make choices. Those choices are either positive or negative. Positive choices feel good to the reader. Negative choices the vehicle makes feel bad to the reader. And I'm not talking about choices in the plot. I'm talking about choices in who the vehicle is going to be. We're talking about character growth choices. In every scene, the vehicle's deciding who they're becoming, right? Every scene, the vehicle's deciding who they're becoming. When they decide to become the person we want them to be, to grow into the best version of themselves, we, the reader, feel good. When they make a choice to behave out of the worst version of themselves or act like the worst version of themselves, we, the reader, feel bad. We don't like that. We want them to be the best version of themselves. We don't want them making mistakes. So the plot, again, is a different thing, right? Like, let's say the vehicle character is planning to rob a bank, and the plot is about can the vehicle character rob the bank? In a heroic tale, the vehicle character has to become the best version of themselves to rob the bank. In a tragic tale, the vehicle character could rob the bank successfully by being the worst version of themselves. And that's going to feel like a tragedy, even though the plot was accomplished. Does that make sense? So the plot is just the path we're on. As the vehicle characters on that path, the vehicle characters making choices about who they are, the best version of themselves or the worst version of themselves. So we're recentering our language and are thinking about characters into character growth arcs, this pattern of growth, as opposed to thinking about characters in plot style. So characters and patterns of growth instead of plot style. Instead of like the journey they're on and how they interact with that journey. Here's a weird thing. If your plot is weak, but your character growth arcs are strong, readers will still love your book. If your plot is strong, but your character growth arcs are weak, your book won't be memorable. That's like, if your plot is strong, you can hit all of the genre tropes, you can nail everything, but your characters don't grow and change, your book is not memorable. If your characters grow and change and your plot is a little whack and off base, it's fine. Readers will stick around for the characters, right? And that is, if you, it is anecdotal. I don't have scientific proof of this. It is anecdotal and what I've learned by working with writers and readers. But think about the books you love. Think about the books you love. Do you love the characters or do you love the plot? Right? Like, and I can just start listing some books that have weird plot things. Harry Potter. You love the characters or did everybody fall in love with the plot? People fell in love with the characters. They loved the boy who was promised greatness as he discovers who he is and the twists and turns of his relationships with his two engines, Hermione and Ron, right? We love the characters. There's plot issues in those books. We love the characters. There's other issues with those books as well that we won't go into right now. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, right? The whole saga, Lord of the Rings. There's some weird plot things that happen in those. There's some weird plot things that happen in those. What are we in for though? Are we in for Strider, the vagabond nomad who will rise up to be Aragon, the coming king? I think that's what we read for. Do we read for Tolkien's deep understanding of magic, or do we read for Gandalf, the reluctant wizard who becomes Gandalf the White? I think that's what we read for, right? We read for the character. We love the character. Do we really like plots about hobbits having 3 breakfasts as they travel through Mordor? Or do we really love the struggle of Frodo as he battles his anchor golem and the influence of his anchor golem and tries to grow into the influence of his engine Sam? I think we like the triad between Frodo, Gollum, and Sam. That's what we're after. So, and we love it when Gollum becomes Smeagol because it feels great. We're like, oh man, we're making progress. And we are sad when Frodo gives in to the Gollum side of his personality, right? Like it feels tragic. And that's what we're there for. So I could go on and on. I could just keep naming stories, right? And we're going to do some examples of stuff, but I do want to hammer home that there is a vertical and horizontal axis here, where if you think of your vertical axis as the timeline of your story and your horizontal axis as positive growth or negative growth on the bottom, the emotional journey your reader takes are those choices in every scene that your vehicle character is making of positive and negative growth. That's what makes up the emotional journey. The bigger your vehicle characters change, the more dynamic and huge the story feels. Right? Okay. So now that we've kind of set the groundwork for what we're working with, let's talk about all of those other cast members. And we're going to take them a piece at a time. We're going to break them down. The first time we're going to talk about our engines. So engines are characters that encourage the vehicle toward positive change. They inspire the vehicle to grow toward the best version of themselves. These are a lot of times these are allies, but not always. And I'm going to give some examples of like things that I'm watching. I'm going to be selfish and just talk about things that I've enjoyed recently. It's my podcast. What are you going to do? So you can complain. People complain. And I understand, and I do apologize. But not today. No, I'll apologize today too. So we're talking about engines. They help the character grow into the best version of themselves. There's 2 types of engines. There's engines that push and engines that pull. So engines that push are engines that inspire the vehicle to become the best version of themselves by creating a challenging environment that the vehicle must overcome. So the vehicle encounters an engine that pushes and is like, I have to grow because this person is making things difficult. And so I have to grow to overcome the challenges being put in my way by this person. I have to outgrow this person. The other type of engines is engines that pull. Engines that pull are engines that encourage the vehicle to become the best version of themselves by modeling the behavior we want the vehicle to grow into. So engines often look like who we want the vehicle to become, not in appearance, but in characterization. The engine looks like who we want the vehicle to become. So engines that grow are engines that look like the vehicle, who the vehicle is going to become. Sorry, that was messed up. Engines that pull look like who the vehicle is going to become and encourage them through modeling the best behavior of the vehicle. So I'm going to talk about 3 examples. I'm going to talk about Claire Fraser from Outlander, because I've been reading the Outlander books and watching the TV show. I'm going to talk about Vincent from the new Netflix show Eric, and I'm going to talk about Simba from The Lion King. I tried to find 3 very different examples. Outlander is kind of your classic romance. Eric, the story of Vincent is a drama of a father looking for a runaway son, and we all know The Lion King, right? Like Simba is the displaced son who runs away when his father dies and has to go back and reclaim his kingdom. So these vehicles all have better and worse versions of themselves. Claire Fraser is and by the way, I'm going to spoil the crap out of this. So the only one I'm actually a little worried about is Eric, because it's only been on, when I'm recording this, it's only been on Netflix for like a month. If you don't want Eric spoiled, go watch it real quick and then come. It's only like 7 episodes. Go watch 8 maybe. Go watch it and then come back and listen to this. You'll actually appreciate this a little more. I don't worry if you haven't seen The Lion King and you haven't seen the first season of Outlander. I'm not concerned. I am, and let me just say here too, I know we're writers and most of us are novelists. I use TV shows because they're super accessible and because we live in this golden age and have been in this golden age of visual media for a while. So TV shows are just more, they're just easier to use as examples because more of us have seen them, right? Like if I could do this with like Bachman's Beartown, right? Friedrich Bachman's Beartown. I could do this with TJ Klune's House on the Cerulean Sea. I could do this with Beloved. I could do this with 1,000 books that I love. I'm rereading The Firm right now. I could do this with The Firm. But I'm more likely, if I talk Lion King, I'm more likely to hit most of you. If I talk Outlander, I'm more likely to hit most of you than I would if I pull books, because we all just, there's so many stories. So that's why I'm using TV shows. And it's great because if you haven't seen Outlander, you can go watch the first series, or at least just watch like 3 or 4 episodes and get an idea of what I'm talking about. So that's why I'm using television shows. Let's talk about each example real quick. Claire Fraser is our vehicle character that we're going to focus on. Outlander and Eric are actually multiple vehicle stories. So we're just picking one vehicle. Well, I'll talk a little bit at the end after I've covered engines, anchors, and hazards, how they work in multiple vehicle stories, if I remember. But we're going to focus on one vehicle for Outlander and for the TV show Eric. I'm pretty sure Lion King is a single vehicle story. You might get Mufasa, maybe a little bit of a supporting vehicle. It's been a while since I saw it, but I think it actually is just Simba is the vehicle of the whole story. So Claire Fraser in Outlander, she is a combat nurse who accidentally travels through a stone back to England. Man, I can't remember the dates, but it's around the failed Scottish Revolution. So she travels back in time, and through the first season, what the positive growth is, we want her to what you're longing for as a reader is for her to accept her place where she is right now and fall in love with Scotland in the same way that the people around her have. That's what we want for Claire Fraser. For the worst version of Claire is when she's rejecting the world she's in, she's hating the world she's in, and she is pining just to go home. That's the worst version of Claire. So that's our Outlander growth. We got positive and negative growth. For the TV show Eric, the vehicle character we're focusing on is Vincent. He's a father whose son has run away. The best version of Eric is the version who is engaged with his family, who is listening to the people around him, who is in functional relationships, and who is less selfish and less narcissistic. The worst version of Vincent is the version who is depending on drugs and alcohol, is angry when things aren't going his way, and really has this narcissistic obsession with himself. So through the story, we're watching Vincent change as he searches for his son. Simba is the vehicle we're focusing on for the Lion King. The best version of Simba is the Simba who models after his father and becomes the strong leader that saves the Pride Lands by defeating his uncle and taking charge of the Pride. The worst version of Simba is the Hakuna Matata Simba, who has no worries and just spends his days in leisure, looking for food and singing songs. So we've got two versions of Simba. So you see how with all of these, I'm setting up that vertical arc, that vertical line of positive, best, and worst versions of themselves. Let's talk about engines that pull. These are characters in these stories that we want our vehicle character to become more like. We don't want them to become the engine in most cases, but the engine has qualities that we want our vehicle character to resemble. So in Outlander, one of the engines, and usually there's multiple engines, we'll talk about how that plays in here in a minute when we get to the practical steps. I'm going to outline all three things, and then I'm going to talk about practically how you use them, and then we'll take a beat and talk about multi-vehicle stories and what does it mean for an engine character in a multi-vehicle story. So in Outlander, the engine that I'm going to talk about is Jamie Fraser. He is the love interest of Claire. It ends up marrying Claire, like he ends up being her husband. The Outlander story really is a love story between the two of them, that spans time, right? Like that's kind of the center of the story. Jamie loves his people. He loves his country. He cares for his people. He's super brave and noble. He's willing to do what it takes to protect the people around him. So Jamie is present where he is, and he loves the people he's with. And that's what we want Claire to be. We want her to be present. And when she has her most noble moments, when she has the moments in the show that just make us excited for who she is, it's because she's being present where she is and she's acting like Jamie. That's an engine that pulls. Jamie is modeling behavior that we want Claire to adopt. In the story of Eric, there is a landlord named George who is kind of the maintenance guy / landlord that oversees the building that the family lives in. He's very kind to children. We find out in the story that Edgar, the boy who's run away, has actually been spending time in George's apartment, drawing with chalk on the walls. And George encourages Edgar's art. Now, Vincent, when he's being the worst version of himself, is such a narcissist, he can't encourage his son's own growth. So we want Vincent to look more like George. We want Vincent to be able to encourage his son's growth. We want Vincent to be this kind of pillar of the community that people love to be around and care for. And in again, spoilers warning, in the end, because this is a heroic tale, Vincent takes on that kind of community. In order to find Edgar, Vincent has to become the kind of community center like George is. So again, an engine that pulls, and Vincent the narcissist needs to be like George and listen more and care more about the people around him. Simba's engine is not engine that pulls is Nala. Nala is courageous and focused on when Simba encounters Nala again in the middle of the show. He separates from her for a bit and then he re-encounters her. And when he re-encounters her, she is shocked that he is living this life of leisure. And she calls him to be the best version of himself. And she herself is going back to fight for their home. She's noble, she's brave, she's courageous, and Simba can become the character we want him to be by mimicking the traits that Nala has. Those are engines that pull. Engines that pull encourage our vehicle characters to be the best version of themselves by modeling that behavior. Now, the other type of engine is the engine that pushes. Claire Fraser has two engines that push that I think maybe some of the best parts of season one. Rupert and Angus. They are a little vulgar. They're very uncouth. They're very they're just wild, right? Like they're just two wild, rough and tumble guys. And they're obnoxious. And they're obnoxious to Claire. They tease her, they poke fun at her. And they cause situations that can often irritate her. At the same time, because they are who they are, Claire learns to love them, and by learning to love them and care about them, she becomes the Claire we want her to be. So these aren't engines that are modeling positive behavior. These two guys are engines that are creating environments that our vehicle character grows in. In the story of Eric, Vincent is plagued by hallucinations of a monster that his son has created that he wants Vincent to make into a puppet. Vincent's kind of a Jim Henson puppeteer type character who has his own show for children. And so Eric plagues Vincent. Now, Eric in Vincent's mind is mean and he's aggressive and he kind of has like an angry New Yorker vibe, and he's belittling and he's pestering and he's frustrating and he creates an environment that that demands Vincent be the best version of himself. Eric is constantly calling Vincent to do things to seek out his son's forgiveness. In the end, Vincent has to wrestle and fight Vincent and beat Vincent down to become the person that Eric's going to become because Eric is so belittling to Vincent. So in the end, Vincent has to defeat the monster in order to become the hero that he is. And he actually embraces the monstrous side of himself, puts on the monster's costume in order to rise up and find his son. So there's a really dynamic parallel between this engine that pushes. We don't want Vincent to look like the monster. We don't want Vincent to become the monster. We want Vincent to reject the monster in becoming the best version of himself. With Simba, we have Rafiki the monkey. He's the wise sage, but he's also a little wild. He's a little weird. He's singing strange songs all the time. And he's giving cryptic wisdom to Simba at a critical point in the story. We don't want Simba to become like Rafiki. We don't want him dancing around singing weird songs about squished bananas and saying things like, you don't know who you are. Like, that's not what we want. But Rafiki is a character that creates an environment that pushes Simba to become the best version of himself. So that's an engine that pushes. So engines that pull, engines that pushes. These are two tools in your cast toolbox that you can take out and use. Let's talk about the contrast of those. Anchors. Anchors are characters that encourage vehicles toward the negative version of themselves. They encourage negative change. And there's the same two types of vehicles. There's two types of anchors. There's anchors that push. These are the anchors that create an environment that the vehicle feels they need to escape by becoming the worst version of themselves. So anchors that push trigger bad behavior in the vehicle. The vehicle isn't modeling the anchor that pushes. The vehicle is triggered by the anchor that pushes and then flows into the worst version of themselves. Anchors that pull model bad behavior and call the vehicle to be the worst version of themselves by mimicking traits that also equal how the vehicle, how we don't want the vehicle to behave. So anchors that pull, anchors that inspire bad behavior by modeling that behavior. So Claire has and some of y'all who like Outlander, y'all gonna be mad. Y'all gonna be mad. You can be mad. You can write me letters in the comments. You can send me emails. You know I answer them. I know y'all gonna be mad at this. Frank, Claire's husband, who's back in post-war England, he's an anchor that pulls. He is and really the idea of him, the memory of him, is constantly calling Claire to think of the Scotland that she's in as barbaric, to think of it as inhumane, not to see the people, but to see it as this time that needs to change. He's kind of a historian, an amateur historian who is fascinated by the time that she ends up going to, but not necessarily in a good way. Fascinated by it in a way that's like, can you believe these brutes type fascination. So when Claire models him, she's the worst version of herself. She's pining to go home. She has a weird disdain for everything around her, which we just don't like. So that's that anchor that pulls. I know some of y'all mad at that. So yeah, you can be mad. You can be mad. And feel free to tell me that I'm wrong. Vincent, and Eric, his father is an anchor that pulls. We meet his father about halfway through the show. His father is a narcissist who's distant, who doesn't care about other people, who's prioritized his work and his wealth over his relationship with his son, and who is completely broken his relationship with his son. And we see that these are qualities that when Vincent is being the worst version of himself, he looks like in many ways his father. He's that selfish narcissist who thinks his work is the most important thing in life. Anchors that pull for Simba are Timon and Pumbaa. Timon and Pumbaa are Simba's anchors that pull. Hakuna Matata. Just hang out here with us. What a wonderful phrase. It means no worries for the rest of your days, right? These are anchors that pull Simba to the worst version of himself. I want to pause here, and this is one of the reasons that we're using the terms engines and anchors instead of heroes and villains. Is Frank in Outlander a heroic character or a villain? He's kind of neither. He's kind of a side character, especially in the season 1 of the TV show. He's not a villain. He's not fighting against her in any way. There are villains. We'll get to one of them in a minute. There are villains, but he's not one of them. He's more of a side character, but he's definitely her anchor. The father in Eric is a villain, but Timon and Pumbaa are allies. They're friends, but they serve as anchors. Does that make sense? That's why we're getting away from these hero villain words to focus on character growth, because Timon and Pumbaa, are they villains? No, they're not villains, but they're encouraging negative character growth. right? So they're anchors. And that's why we're moving away. So we can focus on character growth, because the words villain and hero and ally don't really help us when we're talking about character growth. Okay, so anchors that push, these are anchors that create environments that drive our characters to the worst version of themselves. So Frank has an ancestor, an Outlander, who is in the time with Claire, and he is constantly creating monstrous moments in Claire's life that make Claire want to run away. He's an anchor that pushes. Interestingly, and this often happens in multiple vehicle stories, Jamie is also a vehicle, Claire's husband. This same character is an engine that pushes for Jamie. He's an anchor that pushes for Claire, but he's an engine that pushes for Jamie, which creates great tension between the two vehicles when this character comes around, because Jamie rises to the best version of himself while Claire is wanting to run, right? Like, so there's that push and pull between the two vehicle characters. In order to be the best version of herself, Claire has to reject the influence of this anchor, right? Not give in to her natural tendencies when this anchor comes around. In the story of Eric, Vincent's wife is an anchor that pushes. She doesn't resemble who we want Vincent to become, like who Vincent is going to become if he's the worst version of himself. But she creates environments that constantly drive him to behave like the worst version of himself. She is incredibly critical. She has already given up on the marriage and is actually cheating on him with somebody else. Again, I warned you. Spoilers, I don't feel bad. She feel a little bad. She's yeah, she's constantly harassing him, blaming him, rather than trying to be a team player with him, distancing herself from him and making him feel like he is the problem. This drives him to the worst version of himself. She's an anchor that pushes. In order to be the best version of himself, he has to reject his natural instinct when she's around and choose to be the better person. Simba's anchor that pushes is his uncle Scar. Scar creates the environment that drives Simba out of the kingdom. And then, even when Simba returns, Scar constantly reminds him that he is not his father and that he is not succeeding where his father succeeded. So, anchors that push. So, we've got anchors that pull. They model behavior that calls the vehicle to them, and anchors that push. They create environments that are that our vehicles naturally want to drive. That our vehicles are triggered to be the best version of themselves. So that's engines. That's anchors. Let's talk about hazards. Hazard characters are big, loud personalities. They're always big and loud personalities that force our character to make a choice about how they'll behave in a scene. Um, Hazards are big because they can't be ignored. When our character encounters a hazard, you want the personality to be so large, the voice to be so large that the character can't ignore them. Now, hazards don't give an instinctual response one way or the other. They're not modeling good behavior like an engine that pulls. They're not necessarily creating environments that our character wants to rise above, that the natural instinct of our characters to rise above and embrace. Like Claire Fraser with Angus and Rupert, they remind her of the soldiers that she used to treat in the war. So they, even though they're obnoxious, they call her to the best version of herself. Hazards don't necessarily do that. They're not calling anybody the best version of themselves. They're also not triggering necessarily to the worst version of themselves, and they're not modeling personality traits to their worst version of themselves. They're just big personalities that cause conflict in a scene, that force the character to move, force the vehicle character to make a decision. So, and that's how they work. Ideally, you're only going to use them a few times in the story, and that's because they are so big. They're usually typically kind of one big note that we just see over and over again. So they're only going to appear a few times in the story, and then again, in the, like, ideally you're going to see them somewhere at the front of the story, and our vehicle is going to interact with them, usually in the typical like hero version of the story, the victorious version of the story. At the beginning of the story, the hero is going to be challenged by them and choose to be the worst version of themselves. And then when we see them again at the end of the story, the hero chooses to be the best version of themselves. So usually get them twice at least. That allows, they're great tools to demonstrate change for the reader. The reader sees them at the beginning and the end, and sees like, oh, the character's changing based on how they're interacting with the Hazard character. Hazards don't need to be deep. I often tell writers when they're writing a Hazard character, pick one personality note and just go all in. Right? If the character's shy, go all in on shy. If the character's a rage monster, go all in on rage monster. Right? Like go super deep with a Hazard. So let's go back to our vehicle examples and talk about some Hazard characters with Claire Fraser. There's another woman who we find out is actually also from the future, trapped in this timeline. She is very different than Claire in that she is aggressively manipulating the situation around her. So when she shows up, she forces Claire to make decisions about who Claire is going to be. Sometimes those decisions are negative, sometimes they're positive. We only see her a couple times in that first season when she appears. Vincent's Hazard character is his son. Now, it's interesting because his son is also a vehicle. His son is a supporting vehicle who has his own scenes. But Vincent's, in relationship to Vincent's Hazard character is Edgar, his son. Edgar has, when he's with Vincent, has kind of a single note, and Vincent, and that is vulnerable, artistic kid. And Edgar is all into vulnerable artistic kid, 100% vulnerable artistic kid. So we get this kind of single note from Edgar. Simba's Hazard characters are the hyenas. They're just an example. Simba only encounters them twice, at the beginning when he runs away from them, and then at the end when he stands up to them, right? And they don't change. They're just loud and crazy. That's what they're, malicious, loud and crazy. That's what the hyena characters are. Okay, so now that you understand what engines, anchors, and hazards are, and you understand the different types, let's talk about how you use them. So there's two ways to use them. One is at the scene level. So when we're talking about individual scenes, and we're talking about like, what characters do I need in this scene? Using engines and anchors will change the tension the character feels at the scene level. So, I talked about your vertical axis being, this might be too math nerdy for some of y'all. Just ignore this moment. I talked about your vertical axis being positive or negative change, and your horizontal axis being time. You can actually have a Z axis that like stretches towards you and away from you. There's a great moment in this. I learned about the Z-axis from the movie Stargate, like I think all children's of the 90s did, where he like puts 6 dots and then he draws like the X, Y, and Z axis. That Z axis is the tension your vehicle character feels about change. So if we take our thing, if we've got time here and growth here and Z coming towards us, we take our graph and turn it 3-dimensionally so that we're looking down the barrel of time, so that each moment that we're looking at is actually just a moment in the story. Tension for negative changes on your left, and tension for positive changes on your right. Best version of the characters at the top, worst version of the characters at the bottom. So if you want to create positive tension for good change, right, where your character has tension to become the best version of themselves, put engines in the scene. Now remember, your vehicle character is making choices. So if you put an engine, it doesn't mean that your vehicle decides to be the best version of themselves. But if you want Claire to feel tension to be the best version of herself, put Jamie in the scene. Claire may still choose to be the worst version of herself, but the choice to do that is harder because an engine is present. Let me say that again. When you put an engine in a scene, the choice to be the best version of themselves by the vehicle is easier because the engine is creating positive tension. The choice to be the worst version of themselves is harder. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It means it's harder because the engine is creating positive tension. So if you if you really want it to hurt a reader, when a vehicle chooses to be the worst version of themselves, have them do it in the presence of engines. Because you'll be like, no, everything was right and you still got it wrong. Right? That's what that positive tension does. Now, anchors have the same effect. Anchors create negative tension so that it is easier in the presence of an anchor for a vehicle to be the worst version of themselves. But it is harder for a vehicle to be the best version of themselves. So if you want Claire, and I'm just using Outlander because it's the first example on my mind. I can use the other examples too. But if you want Claire to struggle to choose to be the best version of herself, and you want that choice to be super victorious, have her think about Frank and then run into the captain, right? And that's her two anchors pushing and pulling, creating massive negative tension for her to run away back to her home place and reject this land that we really want her to embrace. Right? Huge tension. If you want it to feel easy for her to become the worst version of herself, put those characters there and it feels easy. Right? So you can use at the scene level these characters, the engines and anchors, to create positive and negative tension of change so that it's harder or easier to be the best or worst version of yourself, depending on who the scene is with, right? If you want it to hurt when the vehicle character chooses to be the worst version of themselves, put engines in the scene. If you want it to feel great when a vehicle character chooses to be the best version of themselves, put engines in the scene. When you want it to feel like, yeah, they didn't really have any other choice to be the worst version of themselves, put anchors in the scene. When you want it to be super heroic and difficult in a scene for a vehicle to make the positive choice about who they are, put the anchors in the scene. Does that make sense? It creates tension. So high tension, high positive tension with lots of engines, positive choice feels natural, right? Low tension with lots of anchors, positive choice feels hard. So you can kind of see how it starts to work. I hope that was clear as mud. That's at the scene level. At the story level, when we're talking about the emotional journey your vehicle is on, the more anchors you have in your story, the harder it is for your vehicle to choose positive change. So if you want a story that feels like it is a difficult fight to be the best version of themselves, give them a ton of anchors. If you want a story, and that's kind of how The Lion King works for the first half, right? In the first half, Simba is chased out of town by Scar and the hyenas, and he is embraced by anchors, Simba and Pumbaa. It's super easy for him to be the worst version of himself. It would be almost impossible for him to be the best version of himself. We pull Nala in there as an engine, and it gets a little easier for him to make that decision. And then Rafiki shows up, and now it's like, yeah, this is where we're going. So you can see how on the overall arc of emotional journey, we're manipulating the vehicle character's choices and how uplifting the story feels by adding engines and anchors in key places in the story. Right? So we as an emotional journey, we can make the story feel more difficult. If you want the story to feel difficult, add a whole bunch of anchors. If you want the story to be like uplit, that's super uplifting and feels good, like TJ Klune's House on the Cerulean Sea, surround that vehicle with engines. Every character on the island in House of the Cerulean Sea is an engine for Linus, the vehicle character. They're all engines. So he gets on the island and you're like, how can he not change? Look at these amazing people. right? So surrounding him with engines. The only anchors he encounters are when he goes home to his normal life. There he has anchors. But on the island, everybody's an engine, everything's positive. So that's why it feels like uplifting literature, because he's surrounded by engines. So you have these tools and you can use them in ways. Let's pause here for a minute and talk about, I don't think I have a slide for this, but let's pause for a minute and talk about multiple vehicle stories. So when you're deciding if a character is an anchor, an engine, you have to look at that character through the eyes of a single vehicle. Let me say that again. When you're deciding if a character is an engine or an anchor, you have to look at that character through the eyes of a single vehicle. A character that is an engine for one vehicle might be an anchor for another. A character that is a vehicle through the eyes of another vehicle might be an engine or anchor. So I was talking about Outlander. In romance novels that end with the couple coming together, your two vehicle characters, Jamie and Claire, are engines to one another. Because when they come together, they are the best versions of themselves. And that's why we want them to unite. We want them to unite because they're the best version of themselves. If you're writing like an enemies to lovers trope, they exist in the world as the worst version of themselves. That's their starting place. But when they're next to each other, they're likely engines for one another that push each other. Now, if you want to write a tragedy like Romeo and Juliet, get two vehicles who are anchors to one another. Romeo and Juliet are anchors that push each other to the worst version of themselves. They create circumstances with each other that keep making them make the worst decisions possible. They become codependent and obsess over each other, and that's why it ends in death, right? A pox on both your houses, you dumb, stupid teenagers who are codependent on one another and can't see the world around you for what it is, right? Like that's the worst version of themselves. That's why it's a tragedy when they die. Because you're like, man, they chose the worst version of themselves. But they're both anchors to each other. As long as they had a relationship together, they weren't going to have a choice, right? So, going back to the multi-vehicle idea, when you're deciding if a character is an engine or anchor, you do it through a single vehicle perspective. And then when you change the vehicle you're writing, let's say you change the point of view, you change who the main character is, you then have to reassess how these characters operate for that main character, for that vehicle. So each vehicle sees the cast through their own lens, right? So these tools are focused through the eyes of a single vehicle. The characters might have a different relationship with a different vehicle. What I like to do if I have a multi-vehicle story, and we actually teach this in the Dash, is you kind of create a scatter plot where you put your vehicles in the middle, and then you draw lines to the other characters of like, okay, here's Jamie and here's Claire. I'm going to put all the other characters around them. And then I'm going to be like, okay, these are engines to Claire. These are anchors to Claire. These are engines to Jamie. These are anchors to Jamie. So I can kind of see how the complex web of a relationship works in a multi-vehicle story. Single vehicle stories, single POV, single main characters, they're way easier because you don't have to do this perspective switch. So practical steps. Step one, find your vehicles. You got to know who your vehicles are. Find your main characters. Step two, make sure your vehicles have growth arcs. Again, go back to episode 185 if you want more on that. Step three, in relationship to each vehicle, label your anchors and engines. How are they? Who are they? Step four, look at your cast and the whole story and determine like, hey, I have like 7 anchors and 1 engine. This is going to feel like an impossible climb to the best version of myself. Is that what I want? If I'm trying to write Uplit and I have all anchors, it's going to be really tough. It's not going to feel like uplifting literature. If I'm trying to write an epic fantasy that feels like it's a fight just to have an inch of success, but everybody's an engine, it's not going to feel that way. It's going to feel uplifting and like an easy journey. This quest is easy. Everybody's an engine, right? Like, so you need to work on the dynamics of your cast to give the story you want to tell. And then finally, as you write and edit, think about the tensions in your scene. Is if you can think about this, if you're a big plotter, you're probably going to think about this before you write a scene. If you're more of a discovery writer or a pantser, you're going to do this when you're editing. When you're looking at scenes, you're going to do this. So know your tools and how they fit uh, inside. And again, this all comes from the perspective of the vehicle character. Here's another question I get asked all the time that I don't have a slide for. Can a character start as an anchor and then become an engine? Yes, if your vehicle character experiences change that causes them to reinterpret the relationships around them, a character can start as an anchor and become an engine. So, for example, I think in the episode this week, I was talking with Aaron Betts, an author, that episode right before this one. And Aaron has a journey narrative where his vehicle's going through multiple stages of change. At each moment on the journey, the vehicle goes through another stage of change. At each stage of change, the relationships are going to be reassigned. So engines that push and anchors that push when your vehicle changes may switch places. Engines that what makes something an engine that push versus an anchor that pushes is really just what your vehicle's deciding to do with that character. Right? So take that in as it is. All right. That is our talk on engines, anchors, and hazards. I hope that was helpful. I hope it inspires some of your work. If you're subscribed to the newsletter, the day this goes live, which I think will be on a Thursday, I'll send out the slides in the newsletter so you can have the slides to study. You can subscribe to the newsletter at dialoguedoctor.com. That is it for this episode. Go get those words on the page, y'all. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thanks.